During the day one, we discussed about the Green Deal extensively, about the impact it could have, about the usage of the different data type, the need to connect to this. Earlier, the previous session was really about access to data. We heard about federation as well. And in GREAT, this is exactly what we intend to do. What should be done? Thanks to the European Commission, data spaces has been initiated. This common European data spaces will create a lot of different opportunities for different users to have access and ensure that they can reach the data they need. Green Deal data space is the first one that we'll discuss today. Great. ERSC is involved in this project, and Christian Breeze will moderate the session on this one. Please, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel, for the introduction. And as we have heard before, the focus will be on the Green Deal. We have a project that is called GREAT, focusing on the Green Deal data space, looking together with, I think, 14 organizations in the project on how to establish the Green Deal data space. I would like to give you first a little bit of an overview on what we are doing in the project. So I know that it all sounds a little bit abstract and maybe not clear for everybody what does it in practice mean. But I would like to give you a little bit of an insight of what we aim to do and what we do in that project. Yeah, with this I think we can come to the first slide. So as I mentioned before, the project itself is called GREAT, focusing on the Green Deal data space, and we look actually on its foundation and its community of practice. And what this means is we want to bring in together a lot of different players that are acting in this domain and understand their data needs, their requirements, also their needs towards a data space, so how to access it. And additionally, we also want to see how can we just create such a joint space where data can be accessed in a uniform manner, removing the boundaries we just discussed before. There's a lot of data available at different hubs, at different endpoints with different formats, and what we're looking is exactly at these different distributed data sets and to think about how we can bring this together and to simplify its access and use. Yeah, the Green Deal data space is actually built up on top of two European big initiatives. The first one you see on the left, the single market for data, which is one ambition that Commission announced. And the second big topic is the Green Deal itself that has been announced, I think, in 2019 by the European Commission, where the aim is to tackle the challenges of our environment and to really tackle climate change, to basically fight and work against these impacts, and to put also all initiatives together that we realize these changes in the next few years, as it's quite demanding. The Green Deal data space, you see it here below. How is it defined? It's a federation of data ecosystems enabling policymakers, businesses, researchers, and citizens from Europe and around the world to jointly tackle climate change. So that's the overall ambition, and I think that also nicely summarizes what I mentioned just before. We want to make it usable, and we want to make it usable for the scientists. We want to make it usable for the decision makers, but we also want to make it usable for the people outside to have an insight in what's going on there. What isn't mentioned in that statement is actually the topic that we want to have a look on, and how does the private sector really aim to contribute to this ambition of the European Commission and of our society to make these data sets accessible and usable. So that's a topic that we will discuss afterwards, but please already be aware how does this fit in the overall picture of our community. The project itself is relatively short. It only lasts 18 months. We started in September last year, and we will end next year in the beginning. As I said, we have 14 partners. ERSC was already mentioned. The overall project is led by IDC. We have EGI, the European Grid Infrastructure, involved, also some academic institutions, UDC as a company, ECMWF as an organization acting also in Destination Earth, because we also aim to link towards other organizations. So it's really a relatively wide mixture of organization coming from the academic field, but also from the private field, we don't have public entities, maybe with ECMWF are involved too. So that's the field with whom we are working and try to realize these concepts. And and as I said, we only have 18 months to do this in an iterative step. So we have 2 iterations. Iteration 1 will be closed actually almost now, end of June. End of summer, we will have the first version of deliverables around, where we summarize our achievements of these first months, and then in the second phase we will follow on and detail all the topics in a much more detailed manner. Yeah, so that's the project itself, and that's why we are also here. We get this funded, we have the task to think about all these related topics in a joint manner. The overall objectives, just to summarize them, objective number first is building this community, and that's also actually where ERSC is around. We want to know all the players that are in the field of the Green Deal around. It's the private sector, it's the public sector, it's also the academic institutions, and it's also the initiatives on top of it that can contribute, and we want to talk to all of them. We try to reach really all the big players there, and we want to see what is the ambition behind them. High priority data sets, that's actually a task that EDC is leading in work package 5 in the project, where we really have a look on what are the data priorities of the different communities, what is required. We had before in the morning the Copernicus data space presentation. For sure Copernicus data plays an important role, but it's not only Copernicus data. So we also need a link towards statistical data. We need a link to meteorological data. So towards really a lot of other communities which make a lot of sense. There are also other data spaces around. So their ambition is also to build a data space for the agricultural domain, also for the smart cities domain and so on. So how, what happens there, and how maybe we can also link these different data spaces that are around. Yeah, then we have to set up a blueprint architecture on how can such a data space look like. So there is EGI quite also heavily involved with other partners of the consortium. We need to think about governance and also business models, which I can tell you is not straightforward. So what is the business model? On one hand, we want to make it accessible, it must be free, but how is this finally paid? And and at the end, we have to deliver on a roadmap on how the data space can be implemented, and that's actually the overall outcome of the project, which shall tell us how can we proceed. Yeah, just to remind you, in respect to the Green Deal actions that are important, so it's the biodiversity strategy that we are considering, the Zero Pollution Action Plan, and certain but not least the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. So that are the big actions of the Green Deal that are really in focus of the data space that we are building in. As I mentioned, we reach out to a lot of different stakeholders and partners, just to show you some of them, whom we already have been in touch. So Destination Earth, as you're aware, that's also a huge commission activity, linking Earth observation, linking climate data, and linking also weather or the meteorological data with the agencies ECMWF, ESA, and EUMETSAT implementing it under the hood of European Commission. So that's for sure an initiative that is basically established in parallel and where we need to have good exchange. And that's, for example, also one of the reasons why we have ECMWF in the project consortium, to have a natural link to the activities there. Yeah, we have EMODNet in the marine domain, we have Copernicus in general, we have the DISs, but the DISs are basically now replaced by the data space ecosystem, so we have talks and exchange towards this direction. Also some of the partners itself are providers in Copernicus, so that helps us also a lot to help us out. EEA plays an important role, so actually they have an own initiative focusing on the Green Deal data space and on Green Deal data sets that they require. GRC is an important player in the directive, and I just heard that 2 days ago there was a paper about the European Green Deal data space published by GRC, so they are an important actor there. And last but not least, also the private sector, where we talk to the big players. So we already had a meeting with Microsoft, AWS is interested, Google is interested, and we also need to reach out to the smaller private sector in Europe and need to integrate them. So that's also happening, and actually why I'm here, that's one of the reasons why we also want to talk to the European players in that domain. So that's all a challenge. Bringing that under one hood is almost impossible, but we try to do it as much and as good as possible, and and then we will see what we end up after these 18 months. If you're interested, I also invite you to have a look on the project. I think the project name is simply to remember, so greatproject.eu. That's where you can find the information about the project. And if you're interested, please also just fill in the GDPR correct form so that we can be in touch and provide you information towards our activities, and that we can keep you in the loop. Yeah, so that's actually the main thing that I wanted to tell you. Here you see where you can find information. The website is mentioned. We are active also on Twitter and LinkedIn, so we try to distribute our activities also there, building up the community there, bringing people together in order to discuss this topic. Yeah, the introduction now was a little bit longer because I might be aware that not everybody is sure of what does the Green Deal data space mean, so at least I wanted to give a little bit of frame around this. And then I think the most important part actually comes now. That's not visualized here. I had a slide that is not around, where we have now the speakers involved. We have 5 people on the audience that will discuss the domain and that will give their thoughts and their insights. It's Betty on one hand, Johan from European Commission, Betty from Geosystems Hellas, Markus also from the private sector, Patrick from Airbus, again private sector, and Peter Baumann, somehow sitting in between the chairs on one hand, the university, but also active as a CEO of Rasterman. So therefore, I will invite you all now to the floor, and we will start our discussion. And towards the audience, please also become active, and please also share your thoughts and also concerns on this topic. Yeah, with this, I invite all the speakers to the floor. Please take a seat, and we will start our questions. Good. Maybe before we start, let's do a short introduction of all the speakers. I think that's meaningful, and I think the best thing is that everybody is doing that on his own, because I think you can then stress best your involvement in the overall topic. So, and maybe we start just from left to right. So, Johan, the word or the microphone is on your side. Please provide a short intro.
Yes, it functions. So good afternoon, everybody. It's my big pleasure to be here at this panel of the great event on the Green Deal data space actions. So my name is Jan Bodenkamp. As was mentioned earlier, I'm a policy and program officer in DG Connect in the Commission. And I'm from the part that is really dealing with the European data strategy that has put forward this concept and this idea of creating common European data spaces and to gradually, hopefully, arrive at this single market for data. So that's in a very short nutshell, me.
Hi, and thanks for having me as well. I'm Peter Baumann. At Constructor University in Bremen, Germany, I'm chasing students through computer science. And from our research, where we have developed the pioneer DataCube engine, Rasterman, we have established a spin-off company. And as Christian mentioned, I'm founder and CEO of that company. So we are both in academia and in industry. Plus, that has let me stumble into standardization. And so I'm deeply involved since 19 years now in the DataCube standardization in ISO, in OGC, and also in Inspire. Thank you. Passing on.
Good, then just now around to move the microphone further.
Hi, Markus Brobeck from GAF in Germany. I'm the responsible for business development and sales. We're a company specialized in downstream Earth observation applications, so classical thematic applications, but also data sales of commercial Earth observation data, data brokerage to various customers in Europe and worldwide, actually. So from that perspective, as we're involved in many thematic application domains, amongst others also climate change related, I'm interested to learn and discuss which benefits could come out of this initiative for us.
Perfect.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Escola. I'm with Airbus. If anyone is wondering why Airbus is here, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about aircraft. So Airbus Defence and Space is involved in Earth observation for more than 30 years now. We have the most advanced and diverse satellite constellation. And we are heavily involved in several industrial and environmental initiatives. And again, happy to be here and discuss the Green Deal data space.
Good afternoon to all. I'm Betty Haralabopoulou. I am the CEO and President of Geosystems Hellas, an SME based in Athens, working on downstream space applications since 2009. As add-on to that, I am one of the ERSC directors, and also I am working under the GEO-UN Post-25 group. So the company is working on subjects of the Green Deal since some years, and also from the view of the GEO, I see also the international need of the data spaces for initiatives like the Green Deal.
Thank you for all these introductions. I think we can keep the microphone on the left side. We will use that for the right side. Before we start, I think the whole story started with the European Commission, somehow starting with the European Green Deal, starting also with the data strategy. And therefore, I would like to ask Johan first to give his definition about the Green Deal data space, or for data space itself, and maybe then specifically the Green Deal data space, so that we know what are the thoughts from the European Commission on that topic.
Yes, many thanks. So indeed, the European Commission has put forward this so-called European Data Strategy in February 2020 in order to gradually, as I said already, arrive to this very ambitious goal to come to an internal data market, to a single market for data, where data can flow freely across borders and across sectors. The whole objective is to really try to unlock the value of data and to make sure that data is used even more and more, because a lot of data that we produce every day is still locked in silos, is not used, is not shared, and is not reused. So the European Data Strategy is really trying to achieve that. That's the ultimate goal. And a very important vehicle to try to get there is the common European data spaces. So what do we mean by a common European data space? What do we mean by a data space? So we mean by a data space basically the combination of two very important elements. On the one hand, that you have an IT technical infrastructure, a well-functioning infrastructure that allows you to find data, access data, process data, share it, reuse it, and that combined with a functioning data governance mechanism. So it's really these two elements that for us is very important and is, let's say, the key of a data space. So data governance mechanism means that you are aware of the whole set of rules under which conditions you can, use data, you can share data, etc. So not only having the infrastructure, but also being aware of the rules. And a data space, of course, and especially a European data space, that is to say, that will cover several member states, and in the end, hopefully, of course, all the member states, needs to be open by definition. So organizations, companies, associations, and also individuals as us should be able to access a data space. Of course, if you, live by the rules and use that data space, either as a data provider, as a data user, reuser, both, or maybe as a neutral data intermediary. In a nutshell, the construction of common European data spaces in several strategic sectors is something that has been put forward since 3 years now by the European Commission. And in the data strategy, initially 10 sectors were defined, among which the Green Deal, of course. The Green Deal, as you know, is one of the 6 priorities of this Commission's mandate, together with the digital transition. And in the last, let's say, 3 years, 4 more sectors have been added, like tourism, cultural heritage, or languages. And so in all these very important sectors in the EU, we are trying to roll out, with the help, obviously, of the private sector, gradually these common European data spaces, interconnect them, and come to this single market for data. By the way, in the year that we are celebrating 30 years of the single market as we know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Maybe Peter, as you have the microphone. So what do you, how do you see the data space from your perspective? Maybe also from your academic background. I hope I didn't surprise you too much with the question, but I know that you thought about it.
Yes, and actually I'm seeing that from a little bit of an outside perspective. I always like to say I have acquired amateur status on geodata, but I'm a born computer scientist. And so I'm seeing that a little bit from the outside, and I see problems which you would classify as technical. I mean, first of all, this is all way too complicated. Dealing with the data, making sense out of them, there is so much technology that people need to know. And I believe the computer scientists need to do a hard job here to make that all vanish behind the curtains. I mean, let's look at our mobile phone. Do you know how your cell phone works? I don't. I have a rough idea, but I don't know exactly. Hey, but I don't need to know that. And that, by the way, is the greatest, largest, worldwide distributed database that shuffles around petabytes per day. It works. So in this sense, we need to do a few things, making it simpler. Then, of course, federating. This is Europe per se. We cannot centralize. We need to find ways how we can work together, how our data can work together, despite keeping our individuality, also individual technology, and maybe even individual governance. Also private and public and research, and also different business models. So proprietary, non-proprietary. We need to find ways how to work together. Like on our streets, we have cars that are private. We have commercial providers, trucks going there, and we have public vehicles as well. So I believe that is technology, and I'm putting that as an emphasis because, okay, sorry, I am technologist, but I see, of course, also that there is problems with acceptance, problems with people knowing, so here are data, what should I do with them? What can I do with them? And then pricing. I have an added value, how much am I willing to pay for that? I observe this since, I believe now 20 years, and I still don't see that there is an established market. For example, we did a survey at some time where we found out that different providers have massively varying prices and varying descriptions of their offers, classification. So the market is far from consolidated as far as I can see that. I could go on, but I guess I'll stop here. The clock is ticking, handing over to you.
Yeah, maybe I would actually go back to Johan, because I think what we also need to see is what does Commission now really do to make it happen? Because I think we are all aware that it's too complicated. But how do we tackle it, and how does Commission support this realization?
Yes, so indeed, it's complicated, that's for sure. This is why I was already stressing the fact that the European data strategy has this very ambitious objective to come to this single market for data, and this is something that will take several years, obviously. And also the construction, the development of a well-functioning common European data space, so a data space that is, you know, Europe-wide, is something that will take a lot of time. Maybe it's first good to tell or to remind that, of course, it's not the Commission that has started working on data spaces as the first, let's say, European administration. A lot has happened, of course, in the private sector, in the data world. I mean, all the data specialists out here, they say, well, this is not new, and it's true. We are building on something. But we have put forward, let's say, this concept of common European data spaces to try to bring two elements together, which is the technical part, where still a lot needs to be done, even though there has been massive improvements. But there is also let's say, the legal governance part, which is very, very important. And my panel colleague was mentioning the trust issue, right? So under what conditions can I access data, use data? So what is the Commission doing? The Commission is basically, through this data strategy, playing two cards. It's playing the legislative card because it feels that the data legislation landscape needs to be consolidated, needs to be completed. We have, of course, very important data legislation that is in place. Of course, the GDPR, or the free flow of data for non-personal data, the privacy directive, etc. But for example, what we have been working on since the European Data Strategy is two important acts. One that will become applicable in a few months, which is the Data Governance Act, and which is trying to improve trust, exactly the trust issue, with the creation of neutral data intermediaries, with several elements to advance data altruism, data donation, for example. And then there is negotiations taking place for another important act, which is called the Data Act. So this is something that is now being negotiated by Parliament and the Council, where we try to ensure more fairness in a certain number of data transactions. So for example, the focus is there on IoT data, data that is generated automatically by all our smart devices, etc. So that is a legislative part. Then there is an important funding part, so also to do, let's say. And the do part is the data spaces, which is the reason why we are here. So apart from announcing that it would be good and important to create these European common data spaces in strategic sectors, among which the Green Deal, through the Digital Europe program, which is a very important funding program focusing on digital, and also on the well-known Horizon Europe program, several actions have started, among which exactly the GREAT action, which is funded by the Digital Europe program, in order to start preparing the important elements that was mentioned in your introduction, to start organizing the network of stakeholders, to start thinking about important building blocks, to start thinking about the identification of the high-value data sets that should be part of such a data space, to work on a roadmap, what needs to be done by when in the coming years in order to actually arrive to the deployment of a Green Deal data space, a mobility data space, an energy data space. And in that, and I will stop there, in that whole, let's say, activity of funding through projects and trying to stimulate the organization of the stakeholders, there's also an important, let's say, overall action that is working closely with GREAT and other preparatory actions, which is the Data Spaces Support Center, in order to ensure that there is, as much as possible, a coherent development of those data spaces, and that we do not possibly reinvent the wheel 10 times, and that all this can be interconnected as soon as possible. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Johan. I think you can keep the microphone. And I would now a little bit, or like to follow on a little bit with the private sector now. So we heard now what the Commission's ambitions are. So the idea is to have data available in a simple manner, in a free manner to everybody. So if you now, Markus, think about what is the value chain in your company, how would you see your activities embedded in such a data space?
Yeah, I have to say, I agree to a lot that has been said already, and I think I have to bring a very pragmatic perspective to this, because as private sector, it's just very easy. We have some requirements typically that we need to follow. It's typically where there is business, that is where customers demand something, where there is potential to create something, we're following. And actually, I don't care whether it's called a data space or a data space ecosystem or a infrastructure or a portal or whatever. The only important thing is that I have all the data there that I need. That means that I have either satellite data and or in situ data or modeling results that I need to provide a service, and that I don't have to switch between different systems, because that makes it difficult to shuffle data, to connect and so on. So that is one of the requirements. The other one obviously is price. as you mentioned. That is always important. And otherwise, I mean, we just have to follow the tracks of where the business is. And obviously, if in the Green Deal business, there will be future opportunities, services, applications that do focus around these data that are hosted in these systems, then of course we'll be there. And correctly so, the things should be easy to handle. But let's say as a private sector company, we're probably a bit an advanced user. We can handle a bit of programming. We can handle APIs and interfaces, probably a bit more than common public. So this is not scary to us. Of course, it should be handleable and easy to understand. But otherwise, it will much depend on the offer that is there, and also the commitment of the stakeholders in that Green Deal space to move to this environment to have their business be done. That's my initial perception.
Thanks. Yeah, then let's maybe follow on just in the sequence now. First, Airbus as a data provider, as somebody creating maybe even trying to do business with satellite information and maybe also other geoinformation data. So how do you see your role in such an open, transparent data space ecosystem?
So I would say, Airbus is again supporting many initiatives. We providing the data to different institutions, to the countries, to the private sector. And what I've seen and I heard today, that there's a lot of distributors, a lot of companies that are providing the data, and everybody providing something else. I think it's a good thing because we have this diversity. So once we combine all together in different initiatives, we are much stronger, and then everybody can benefit from this. So, one company is providing revisit, other company is providing quality. There's so many different variables in the sector that, again, once we combine this together, we can make a difference. And what else I can say? I mean, today Airbus is involved, for example, very much supporting common agriculture policy, deforestation, reforestation, and we see this growing, and it's very important for Europe and for the world, and we are happy to contribute to this.
Okay, good, thank you. Then maybe to complete the round with Betty.
To complete the round, what I see from my side is that the private sector used to use data spaces many years. So it's something that especially the private sector is deeply involved. What we expect from the Green Deal data space is to, let's say, get all the existing data spaces that are available, to have a clear taxonomy on the quality and the state of the art, and in a seamless, interoperable way to facilitate the public sector in order that the public sector produce services. Because the Green Deal is an initiative that shall serve the European citizens with services. And facing the future, because it's not only some months of the great project, which is really a great project, what I expect to get from that is the view to the future with a seamless, interoperable and sustainable way. And okay, this may be technically can be covered from the ICT people, but in a way that can be useful for all the European citizens, have to have some standards. So what I would suggest to the great project is to also think about the standards. And the standards will also help the European Union to have further policies on top of the Green Deal.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Betty. And I think, yeah, the sustainability and trust that the data space will be around in the next years, I think will be very essential. And I think we also saw it with the dioceses. They have been around, and it was also discussed before. It was around with an experimental 5 dioceses for a certain time period, and nobody did know what happens afterwards, and is it sustainable now? The data space ecosystem, I think there the lesson learned was, okay, you need to give this already a longer term period, but also there, I think we also need to see, is there enough trust around that people start to use this? And I think this trust can be built then on one hand by the Commission with continuous funding and support into that direction, and that will help a lot. Yeah, we also discussed standards, and when it's about standards, I'm always thinking about Peter, so it's almost already connected. And I think in the discussion that we had before, we also discussed this difference between openness and closeness, and where do we see business opportunities. And I think you, Peter, represent both. On one hand, the very open and transparent world with standards that are necessary in order to exchange. I think nobody is questioning that. But on the other hand, you also do your own business with Rasterman, with open source components, but also value adding on top of it. And maybe can we have a statement from that direction?
Exactly, yes, Christian. We do a dual license model, so we have community edition that is open source, and we have a closed source one. So we have seen both sides of this business, and actually to me, it was always strange how some people argue about the quality of software when this is just about the business model. So these are two totally independent things, I believe, and also I believe it makes sense to differentiate. Open is so open. People use it in so many contexts. Open source. Do I have available the source code of the tool that is running somewhere? Open standards. Can I use that? Are the APIs defined? Are they accessible to me? Can I understand what they do? Can I use the service? And personally, I believe that open services based on open standards are the main important thing. I give you an example. SQL is there for a long time. Now, you have in the back end IBM DB2 that uses SQL. And you, as an end user, come there via a web interface, you don't even see the database, and you use the data. Then there is a replacement. Somebody says, I want to replace that by PostgreSQL. Will that change something? Yes, there have to be a little bit of adaptations because nobody follows exactly the standards, but in the end it's SQL. And SQL defines what the result is of a database query, not the product, if it's well built. And so as a user, I'm much more interested in what is the result like than what's behind there. Therefore, the SQL standard, which actually greatly has helped shaping the database market, homogenizing it to have comparable offers between different vendors, and so that I know what the result of a query will be without knowing the exact product. That, I believe, is a great advantage, and that is what makes a service usable. I know what I can do with it, and I don't care how it's implemented. That has another implication. If we don't fix everything, then the vendors or open source developers, whatever, can have their magic behind the curtain and do particular tweaks to have this or that advantage, performance or stability or access control, whatever. So in the end, I believe we need to have the open standards, and if these are adopted coherently, then we get vendor independent. I'll come back to that word in a minute. And how the service in the backend is done does not affect the service quality if we have these standards. Coming back to vendor independent, just to show you a paradox, maybe you think it's a paradox. You buy SQL databases, so you get them for free, exchangeable. Now, if you want to switch to an open source NoSQL database, there is no standard for NoSQL. Every one is individual. So if you use Hadoop databases like Pig-Latin, or if you use Cassandra or MongoDB, you have to totally rework your infrastructure, your queries, the way you organize and access data. They're all open source. I don't want to talk bad about these systems. I just want to point out that standardization is the value that helps us. Okay, now I've used the word open sufficiently many times, I guess. So maybe I'll stop here and give back to you.
Yeah, actually, I would give it back to Johan to see what does Commission do in order to support standards, because there's this magic word of simple around. And simplicity, we already discussed, we want to make it simple, but there's actually also a Commission initiative about simple around, and maybe you can refer also to that idea.
Yes, absolutely. So of course, standards, interoperability is very, very important to make a data space function. Is work being done since years and years already in all sorts of fields and sections. So simple, the word was used. What does simple refer to? The ones that maybe are not yet acquainted with this word. Simple stands for middleware software that is currently being procured by the European Commission, and that should help to interconnect the data spaces and also within the data spaces as a middleware layer. So this is an open software. It will be an open software. It is currently being procured, so it's in the process of being procured by the Commission, and then will be made available to all the data spaces initiatives that are currently, preparing their actions, like Great for the Green Deal. So where do we stand at this point in time? Evaluations are taking place in order to have a framework contract with 2 or 3 maybe successful applicants, and on that basis a contract will be signed, so that hopefully in the beginning of next year, Q1, Q2 probably, there will be particular work being done on the availability of this simple smart middleware. Just to come back to the important work of standards and interoperability, this Data Spaces Support Center that I was mentioning, which is also one of the funding actions by the Commission to develop the various sectoral data spaces, has been working now for 8 months, and one of their tasks that they are working on is to make an inventory of important standards, specifically for the data spaces. So that work is taking place right now. It is taking place together with the sectoral data space initiatives, such as GREAT. So just a small reminder, next to GREAT for the Green Deal, you have all these other actions that are working on this agriculture data space, manufacturing data space, energies data space, skills data space. They are all working together with the Data Spaces Support Center in order to establish this inventory of important standards and what works maybe less well. And on that basis, there will be another group that is going to be set up in September, which is a member states expert group set up by the Data Governance Act, that is going to work specifically on establishing guidelines for data spaces, and will be specifically working on the question of standards, cross-sectoral interoperability in specific working groups, and the inventory of the Data Spaces Support Center with the help of GREAT, for example, for the Green Deal data space, is something that will be important input to work on that. Of course, with the cooperation of standardization organizations in general, obviously. So, yeah, this is what we're intending to do on standardization and interoperability.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Johan. So there will be money around, there will be support in standards around, and there is the ambition to build this data space in a joint manner, which is, I think, very important in respect to sustainability. Looking now a little bit again to the private sector, and I think
maybe I can add a footnote quickly. I would like to use this opportunity to say thank you to the European Commission, because it's also your support that allows us to do this standardization work, so that Europe can contribute actively and shape standards. Thank you.
Good, all fine. Yeah, with this I thought maybe we come back to the private sector. Maybe I can start with Betty now again, so that she is not always at the end of the queue. I expect that you use a lot of open source standards in your company in order to do and realize your activities. How do you see this relation between open source, closed source? How do you build business on top of it? And yeah, and are initiatives like Simple something that you aim to consider in the future?
Yes, it's true. There are some, in several cases, several modules that we are using open source. And the key point in all those is the evaluation and validation. Means that in order to deliver to a customer something that has concrete value, we use multiple methods to have correct evaluation and correct validation. And for sure, I assume that this is one step before maybe the Simple that European Union is European Union's vision that we will see in the close future. And I see that there is a kind of value, but there is also a kind of threat, because everything that is open, we start trying as company, as private sector, to have a kind of copyright, to have a kind of patent in order to secure that our team has worked on something, there is value on this, and it's useful for the community and helps the customers, and also like that can be sold outside Europe, because it's not only Europe. If we try to think that European private sector can work also in the global market and have some good benefits, and like that educate new entrepreneurs to move on, we have as Europe a vision.
Good. Yes.
Thank you. So, open source, I have to say, I think we all like open source, right? And Airbus is operating many services on open source data, Copernicus. I mean, it's great, right? I can see some of our services without contribution from the Copernicus. So it's really good to have it. Open standards, of course, it's good to be compatible, plug and play. So if we design something, first we talk to our customers, see whether it makes sense, whether it's compatible with their existing infrastructure. So create the simplicity. So this is number one before we go to any project. And of course, I mean, the Earth observation, right, some cases is complex, right? One thing we cannot say about the Earth observation industry, that it's not rocket science, right? So again, the open source, open standards is very important. We need to look at this to make things simple. But then as a commercial operator, I think it would be hard for us to provide everything open source, because then as a European providers, we would disappear from the surface of the Earth. That's reality. So again, I think we need the support from the European institutions, from the community, to develop, to progress, and to have the sovereign infrastructure.
Okay.
Actually, nothing to add.
Yeah.
That's all that I also would have said.
I was expecting there from you a very similar statement, because that's, I think, valid for the whole private sector almost, that this is seen a little bit in a mixed manner, so making use out of open source is beneficial. On the other hand, results that you do, you also somehow want to protect and not make it accessible, and you have to do this somehow in order to make business again and again. What I'm always asking myself is, can we make it simple? So, or is our whole domain so difficult that if we want to make a data space accessible to person A, B running out in the street so that they really can make use out of it. I don't know, is there somebody around that can say something or wants to comment on this? Because for me, it's always a question on, do we need all these different coordinate systems? Do we need to show it to them? Do we need to have all these hurdles around in understanding the data? Or is it just on different levels, so that for sure we need to have the complicated workflows and runs around? But is there a possibility to make it as simple so that everybody can use it? Peter? Sorry.
Thank you.
Too many microphones around.
Right. So yeah, just something very important was shining through. Not simple per se. We anyway have no measure for simplicity here, but as simple as possible. Everything that is not necessary to achieve my goal, that I need to know that, must be behind the curtains. So these data are in some fancy coordinate system, so what, I don't care. When I fetch it, it should be transformed as I like it. These two data are in feet versus meters, so what? Transform it automatically. We need to enrich our data more in a machine-readable form, I guess, so that that can be done automatically. It can be done to some extent already. But I give you one example where we have a difficulty which I believe could be solved. That is MSL, mean sea level. It's no problem with bathymetry or so in hydrology to measure in feet or in meters. But what is MSL? There was a research vehicle, an unmanned underwater vehicle, that was bought by French people in Norway, and it was diving nicely, and then it was drilling itself into into the seafloor before Marseille. Why? Everything was working perfectly, but the thing was built in Norway, and it was equipped with a definition of mean sea level of Norway, which is different from the mean sea level in the Mediterranean. Certainly the hydrologists know that. They know that, for example, Italy has one particular point where they have measured in 1942 the average sea level, and that's their definition today. Definitions are known. The standards have the structures that could capture that, but it is not fixed, and so we cannot do automatic transformation today. That's one of the things, by the way, that we are discussing in standardization currently, how to spice it up with semantics so that we can push more behind the curtain and leave it to the machine.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think with that, I think we closed somehow the loop with all the presenters. I think we also need to think about, there's also a slide around with some of the questions. I'm not sure if anybody is already aware and if we can somehow present this on the screen. So you can join there, and there are some questions around in order to address your thoughts towards this. So the first one is, where do you see your role in the value chain? And actually I would already combine it with the second question, which is, what do you really expect from a data space? So what is your requirements towards a data space in general, and then maybe more specific towards a Green Deal data space itself? So I don't know, is there somebody in the audience who wants to comment on that? I can also move with the microphone. So, somebody around?
I can run.
Or, yeah, we can share that one, but at the moment I'm rather searching for hands.
Please raise a hand and I will jump over.
Emmanuel Modoro. I would just ask him first. Any thoughts on your side?
Where is Emmanuel?
Over there.
Gotcha.
He was just skeptically raising the hand.
Coming back in a minute.
Sorry that I selected you. You were sitting on the corner.
Yes, good afternoon. I had two questions in the previous session which were not selected, so I decided not asking any question this session. So thanks for selecting me. One question is related to the Grid Deal data space and the other data spaces, because Grid Deal is pretty large, maybe a bit vague as well. And as you mentioned, Johan, there are other data spaces which are somehow links with Green Deal data space. And I take the opportunity to mention that I'm deeply involved in a space data space initiative, which could support a number of other data spaces, including Green Deal. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's actually an important topic, but maybe Johan can reply to that immediately. Can I have the second microphone? Here you are.
The mic is not coming back anymore.
Yes.
No, thank you very much for the question. You raised something very, very important, and I already tried to indicate it a little bit, that this development of the various sectoral or domain-specific data spaces needs to be done in a coherent way, meaning they need to be interconnected, and this is especially very, very important for the Green Deal data space. The Green Deal data space is not a sectoral data space, it's a transversal domain-specific data space. The Green Deal is huge, as we all know, and therefore very complex, and therefore you may say a bit vague, but maybe not so vague if you would really read exactly what the Green Deal objectives are. But very, very, very complex, and indeed, you know, climate change, environmental action is everywhere in what we are doing right here. Do we use a lot of plastic in what we're doing with the private companies, etc.? It's everywhere. So obviously, it is present in all the sectors and therefore present in all the sectoral data spaces. When you are going to be active in a data space, you do not want to be active in only one. You will obviously want to be active in several ones. Now, if you imagine the Green Deal data space, obviously, it means that the Green Deal data space should have access also to important relevant data coming out of the agricultural data space, the manufacturing data space, the energy data space. So indeed, connection, interconnection, being able to be active in various data spaces, as simple as possible, but of course that is to be seen in the coming years, is very, very important to make it successful. And this is also why I try to stress that the creation of common European data spaces is not an objective as such. It's a very, very important objective, but it is as a means to gradually interconnect them and to come to this so-called single market for data. That's the ultimate objective.
Thank you for that statement. Other comments?
Interesting. Somehow microphones always end up with me.
Yeah, maybe we can look in between a little bit on some Slido results. So the first one, I think, I just had a look before. I think there are a lot of value adders around and a lot of consultancy people that showed their interest there. I think that seems to be the really majority. Data reseller, ground stations, that's rather than minority in the audience around. So that's actually also interesting to see. So value adders, I think when I think about value adders, the biggest topic is how to access the initial data and how to distribute then further data sets. So I think therefore I would expect quite some comments from that direction. But I think we could also have a look on the next question, which would actually be what do we expect as requirements from a data space. So maybe we can leave that running now in parallel. And if there are some comments around, I think we can address it. Maybe we can also have a link to the Copernicus data space. I don't know, Yuri, if you have some thoughts on what do you offer then in your data space to make it attractive. Is this something that you could answer, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very happy about this initiative because it shows we definitely have to work together in Europe. And we have to agree on how we make data spaces also connect to each other and how we make it simple for the users to use data across and sell data, share data, produce data. And I think one of the key things is that we should not underestimate the effort that goes in that. Yeah? I think you all have heard about Gaia-X and the enormous investment of the private sector that is going in Gaia-X to build the software components that can be the basis, the fundament of this. And that is where I hope you can also contribute, that we try to make sure that these building blocks are going to be the ones that everybody can use and will use, so that it will be out of those building blocks possible to have this data sharing and have this users going from one data space to the next space. So it's all about these new technologies that we know. How many of you do have a wallet on your smartphone? Right? Okay. These are the things that we have to promote, make users understand what it means, how you can use it, and how you can simply, with your wallet, have your credentials ready to log in or to use any service or any data that is in a data space. These are the simple examples. And we have to really promote it, because a lot of people, I think if you ask also here in the room, have not even started to understand it.
Is it promotion plus education? So what do you think
absolutely.
about education? So what
absolutely, yes. Yeah. But that's already started, I think, on universities and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other comments in the audience? Don't want to pick always somebody. Maybe in parallel I have a little bit of a look on the outcomes. I think still 4 people are typing, but yeah, we still have we have access as an important thing. I think that's what everybody is at the moment annoyed. So data is sitting here and there, sometimes super hard hidden. So accessing the data and reducing the other barriers, I think one of the biggest topic. Harmonization, data standards. I think destination Earth connection. Yeah, is there somebody around who could give a statement into that direction?
Thank you. No, indeed, it's a question to DG Connect, because Destination Earth is a big project, big initiative led by DG Connect as well. So how do you see the link between the Destination Earth and the green data space? Do you plan to put in one single repository all the data used for the Destination Earth, not only the data used, but also the results of the Destination Earth in programs? How is the link between these two big initiatives?
Thank you very much for the question. So indeed, Destination Earth is a very, very important project indeed that is also, let's say, run by DG Connect, in any case by the European Commission, funded by the Digital Europe program, and has a natural link with the Green Deal data space, of course, which is also why it was already mentioned from the outset, meaning that Destination Earth is to be part of the Green Deal data space when it will exist. The common European Green Deal data space is supposed to be connecting in a federated, distributed way all relevant data that can help us all together meet the objectives of the Green Deal. That is the objective of the Green Deal data space. Obviously, EO companies and the whole business landscape of Earth observation is of utmost importance there. It was interesting for me to see that half, I think 51% of the EO, let's say, companies here in this event is based on adding value, right? And this is exactly why we need data spaces in order to make more data findable, available, that more data is going to be shared so that you can add that value, that you can make your products, that you can make your services, and in this case, contribute to meeting the objectives of the Green Deal, which are, I want to stress it again, huge. So indeed, Destination Earth is part of the Green Deal data space for obvious reasons, and this is why from the outset, important connections are being made. Was there something else that I wanted to say? I just wanted to say, I heard the word Gaia X. A very important initiative in the world of data sharing and data infrastructures that was there before the European Data Strategy, right? So the European Data Strategy, February 2020, and this initiative launched by France and Germany in 2019 already. Now this in the meantime has grown to an important initiative on creating this federated data infrastructure, very much in line with the ideas of common European data spaces, and therefore it's not, let's say, maybe by accident that part of the consortium of the Data Spaces Support Center is Gaia-X. Gaia-X is a partner in the consortium of the Data Spaces Support Center, together with very other important partners in the world of the data economy, like Fireware, like the International Data Spaces Association, etc. So, of course, important companies, associations, initiatives in the world of data sharing, the data economy, are looking into this with interest, fortunately for us, the Commission, and are trying to shape that. And we need you, we need them in order to shape that. And therefore, I just wanted to point it out, because Gaia-X has these lighthouse projects that are very, very promising and interesting. And you see very interesting initiatives already popping up in these various fields, like AG Data Hub for agriculture, Catena-X for the automobile industry, Iona-X for mobility, transport and tourism. So things are happening, and it's great to see that, you know, the important stakeholders, such as, for example, Gaia-X, are part of this, let's say, global European adventure.
Thanks for that, and I think the good thing will be that there's really a lot of different initiatives around, and I think we should all keep them, and I think it's also good that we have it, but I think the important key is, and actually when I read here the first thing, no new user interfaces, but no, it's gone, no new user interfaces, but rather open and easy standards to access things. I think that is the key. So we need to allow all these different initiatives, but I think it should be the seamless integration possibility that is important. I think there was a comment over there.
Yeah, I just had a question about this Green Deal data space. Do you have in mind, such as Copernicus, to make it available for the world community, so open and free for everybody?
I have the impression this is a question for me. You mean outside the EU, is that what you mean?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in general, data sharing, of course, is something that doesn't stop at the borders of the EU. So in any case, you know, data, the functioning of the European data economy can really function correctly if we also look at data sharing across the borders. However, what is very important, of course, for us Europeans, and this is why we put that forward in the European data strategy, is that we would like to have it our way, our European way. We find privacy very important. We feel that, you know, the data holders, the data about me or my company, I decide what is going to be done with that. We know other models in the world, we all contribute in a way to it or use it, but we here in Europe do not like those models so much. So we would like to do it our European way, but that does not mean that we're going to not share data outside of the European Union. And especially in a global matter such as climate change, environmental challenges, which the Green Deal is trying to tackle, we should cooperate as much as possible internationally, absolutely.
Even the current political situation hasn't changed that view, huh? Because it's a challenge, I think.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, but at the moment the direction is to continue in that way. Yes. Okay, good to know, because that's maybe also something that I privately also want to know, because for sure with the changing world that we find at the moment in place, we could question if this should be Europe still support in a full manner.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the current world is very complex. We all know it. But just, you know, it's not a slogan, but it's an expression that you will find back quite a bit in Commission documents, also in the world of data sharing. We would like to be as open as possible, but as closed as necessary, because we really feel that we need to, you know, stick to our European values. We want to offer a European approach to data sharing and data added value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's actually also quite nice and good to hear that there's also even a view on this on the longer run and even beyond all the current difficulties that we all observe. Yeah, maybe we should follow on again. I think the next question that is around is what data infrastructures do you work with? I think that's a little bit also from our project perspective important to see where are people acting. So maybe we can follow on that question, and also if there are some comments in parallel around or also from the audience, we can continue the discussion. So that doesn't seem to be immediately around. So nevertheless, I try to keep the ball rolling. So I think I try to summarize a little bit. So I think what we saw is these interfaces are one of the important things. Everywhere you have at the moment registered different, authentication is a big topic. So how do I keep all my passwords around? Is there actually something from Commission around to consider that authentication topic in a centralized manner? I'm aware that there are some initiatives around, but is there the one single simple authentication around in Europe?
Yes, well, indeed, of course, there's a lot of work going on the question of authentication, security issues. A lot of research has gone into that in innovation, also partly funded by the European Commission. But we also have, let's say, in that field, a building block that we can offer and do offer to the data spaces, let's say, as provided by the European Commission, which is done by our IT service. It's called Digit, maybe you know it. They offer various building blocks in general, and also now specifically to data space initiatives. And one of them is, for example, e-identity, which is an existing open building block that can be used and adapted where necessary in the field of authentication. There is e-signature, there is e-delivery, there's the once-only technical system. All these technical building blocks focusing on specific issues are there already, are offered to interested communities that work on data spaces, and in some of the data space initiatives, they are also taken up. So in that sense, the Commission not only provides funding for important research and innovation in these matters, but also a concrete building block that can be used.
Because I think that's really very important, and we have the technical standards around, but actually what is the one single service that we can use? There are a few around, but it's still not as straightforward. Let's have a look. Do we have any questions or results towards the infrastructure already? Just looking up to the technical things, that doesn't seem to be immediately the case. Sustainability, maybe we can come back to that, looking now at the private sector again, and trying to introduce you a little bit again into the topic. What does it need that you say, okay, you rely on a certain thing? So what is the requirement towards sustainability from your side? Is it sustainable if you have it in your own hands, or is it sustainable if you see an initiative that lasts for 4 years, 6 years? What is the indicator that drives you? Is this something that you can answer, or is it just super difficult because it just depends? Microphone.
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? So to be sustainable, of course, we need to have the long-term vision, secure the business, and have the secured continuity, because again, you don't build satellites overnight. You start with the project, you start with the design, then you launch satellite, you do calibration, you need the ground segment, space segment. It takes a lot of time, right? So you need to have this security. So I think, it's a very long process. And you need support from any source you can get, right?
Yeah. I was expecting that not straightforward and rather complex answer. Yeah.
On my side, sustainability, speaking specifically for the data spaces, the Green Deal data spaces, is that the guidelines that we will put from the beginning to have continuation for at least a decade since the Green Deal initiative at least, continues up to 2050, that we want to be on the zero emissions. And based on that, everything that will be designed from now to have a longer vision, a longer view, speaking also on the side of the technology, means that we have to think that all these infrastructure systems shall be maintained, shall be for long term at the state of the art. In order to have this in Europe, we shall have the proper education of students. This is to the university team that we have with us, and means that shall be very well designed in order that also the companies to feel comfortable to build on top of it, because also the companies make strategies and business plans based on sustainable things that we have around. So that's my point on the sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Yeah, I would say, to give 2 examples, what is long-term sustainable and plannable? I would say the Sentinel program. Mm-hmm. This is something in an order of magnitude that both private sector and users can plan for. What is on the other hand, on the other side, I could say from my perspective, the dioceses were a bit on that end. Of course, with the 4 years, that is, one could say that is already quite longish in our fast-moving sector, but if you have no security of the continuation, then 4 years will start to crumble after 2 years. First users will question, yeah, okay, but what then? Will I have to move? Will this provide me the long term? Will I have to move again? And this is less about the private sector, because private sector has to be flexible and to follow the systems and where the market and where the opportunities are, but the users are typically less flexible. They think really long term. And so I think these are the 2 ranges where somewhere in between there could be the cutoff for being sustainable.
Yeah, and especially maybe also depending on the size of the company. So if you're a bigger, large size company, you maybe see it a little bit different than a small one. On one hand, with small companies, you think you are quite adaptive. But on the other hand, if you want to do investments, you need to do it well deserved, and if you think about some of the components, you really also need to have a plan around as a small company. So I'm also not so sure how to argue at the end. It's really a case by case, I think, somehow. And for example, we as a data center, so typically you procure hardware then for 5 years, okay, then I need to know a plan for that period, and if then something else is around where that doesn't then allow to do the business with that hardware element anymore, then it's for sure a huge risk and a big problem. Yeah, Peter.
Objection. This is not necessarily a problem for SMEs only. I've seen that with large companies as well. They have a product, and then a new manager comes to that division and decides that product is not what we want, and then it gets stopped. So that can happen with big company products as well. So actually, I believe that is independent, therefore, from the size. May I add something about sustainability from our experience now, being in the market for some time? If I want to use these services that come up, then for me it's strategically important what will be the governance rules. This is nothing where I can discuss much. Next topic, it's important that the data will be there. My customers want particular data, say radar data, optical data, etc. Will they be provided in the future? I would guess we do that. Europe wants that. So not much doubt about that. But then actually security by not trusting. So what if this service becomes unavailable? If I have then another service that has the same APIs, the same standards, sorry, coming back to that again, it will not be a big step for me to switch to another provider, and I still can serve my customers. If, however, I have very, very specific interfaces with the API, with the Green Deal data space, then it will be difficult for me, and therefore I'm more doubtful about should I get to that service right now, because it doesn't have the future. One example of that is ECMWF. They have a very, very specific API. I believe gradually they are also going into standards. But this is something where we cannot invest effort to specialize exactly for this particular API, and everybody else does it differently anyway. So then outbound, for my customers to provide sustainability, they also ask me, will you be here tomorrow? And you know what? I start giving that back. Will you be my customer tomorrow? As a company, I go where the market is. So if I have customers, I will of course want to sustain the service and keep it up. So this is actually, I believe, a give and take, and not just a one-way requirement from customer side to provider side.
Thanks, Peter. I don't know if there are other comments around at the moment. I think we also can maybe have a look on the poll again. I think there are also quite important comments around the complexity of the current data landscape. I think that really makes it a really huge difficulty, and I can tell you we have a look on this high-value data sets, and it has actually no start and no stop point. It's really super difficult, and that also actually refers to the almost one question that is almost the last one in the list. Think global, forget local, and that's actually a super important thing, because there's a lot of data sets of high value around on very local areas in the municipalities, in the regions, and how can we actually integrate them? And actually the standards there are even worse sometimes. I know it also from Austria, so I know that I was actually harvesting at the university quite some discs from local regions because they didn't know where to put it else, which is really crazy, but on the other hand it also somehow worked, but towards data access and distribution, that's really super horrible. So I think really we shouldn't forget also these very local aspects there. And yeah, and we didn't talk much about Google and Amazon, and to be obliged to go via these big environments. I think that's really also something that we already said. I think that's not the intention. The intention is really a federated setup where maybe also people who know the data best can offer it, but there's a common API, a common language in order to access the data then in a meaningful manner. Competition with the private sector, I think that's always something that the private sector is afraid of, and honestly, me too also. If everything is paid by the public, then you maybe also lose some possibilities to go in the market into that direction. And as a data center, I know what that means if the DIAS is around paying public money. So how can I do then my private investments into that direction? So that is really also something that I think also Commission and the public sector in general always needs to have in mind, that if investments are done from the public in a direction, it might also somehow influence the private sector again, because some of the opportunities are then not again available anymore. On the other hand, I think we all need to live with these decisions and need to be flexible and adaptive with this, and I think we can also be there. But therefore, it's really important for the companies, I think, to know these decisions on the long run. So that we are not getting surprised, because we have our, as I mentioned, 5 years investments towards hardware. So therefore it would really be good to get the signal in time that Commission is just doing that job for all of us. Any comment from your side?
Maybe if I may quickly say some final words, because I saw various remarks, questions, etc., which is great and very important ones. So indeed, first I saw something on the cloud and the fact that we need a cloud solution as well. Very important. The data strategy is also working on creating a credible European cloud alternative. So I didn't mention it at all. I was completely focusing on data, the common European data spaces, which is of course the focus of this, but without, of course, functioning cloud and also an alternative here in Europe, this is not going to function. I saw something popping up like what's coming next after this CSA. So the CSA is this preparatory action in this specific case of the Green Deal data space, and indeed a CSA, so a coordination and support action, a preparatory action from the outset is rather short because you are preparing the field. So this is what GREAT is doing. It's preparing the field for a Green Deal data space in these 18 months that they have only. But, of course, follow-up is being prepared. So the intention is that in the digital work program 2024, so first of all I should say that the digital work program 23-24 already announces that somewhere in 2024 there will be a deployment action for the Green Deal that is going to be published, where of course we hope that a very strong consortium made up of public administrations, associations and the private sector that has a very important role to play are willing to, on the basis of this work that is prepared currently by GREAT and together with the help of the Data Spaces Support Center, all these building blocks, the roadmap, the initial focus on 3 important parts of the Green Deal, biodiversity, zero pollution, and climate change, that on that basis we start deploying a Green Deal data space. Of course, it's very complex, but you should start somewhere. So successful use cases from the private sector or in combination with the public sector, existing very important initiatives, EMOTNet, of course, these kind of things, they should be integrated, they should be used to start deploying a beginning of a Green Deal data space. So that is what is foreseen. This is, of course, the logic for the other sectoral data spaces as well. So deployment actions are starting already for the manufacturing data space because not all data spaces have the same kind of maturity. But of course, it doesn't stop here. And yes, it's complex, but this is also why we need to start. I mean, to close with an image that I try to use sometimes to people that are maybe less acquainted with data economy and data spaces. Our road system as we know it now, including the waterways, including the airways, right, in Europe, in the world, it started very, very small at a certain point in time, right? We started building some roads and then it stopped between the Netherlands and Germany because there was no interest for the Dutch to go to Germany, and at a certain point in time we said, hey, this is important. Let's make the European highways. Let's connect all that together. Let's make common rules on the basis of which we use the roads so that we do not get accidents and stuff. In this, so you have in our road system the infrastructure that has been built over years, and you have the governance. Under what conditions may I use a car? I need my driver license. Everybody needs to learn about the road signs, etc. So that is, for me, an image that you could use also for the data spaces, and this is where we start. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much also for that picture. I think that really shows a little bit the direction where we need to go. So we really need these data highways around so that exchange of data from different places is happening in a simple manner. Yeah, looking at the time, we are almost at the end, but Peter needs to say something. I will give him a minute and then
we are discussing here how to do that and how not to do it, but I guess we all agree that we need to do it somehow, for the sake of Europe in general, that we survive technically and economically. So think next time, if you really want to put your data to Google or to Amazon, maybe the services that we have developed here in Europe are not yet that advanced, but hey, we need to build up something and we need to work together on that.
Also, many thanks for that great statement that I can also just underpin and underline. Looking at the answers, I think what does part of mean, because that's really now huge on the screen. I think maybe that also shows us that we need to describe actually what we mean with the Green Deal data space in a meaningful manner. Maybe it's just also just formatting because it's just one large line and therefore it's so much visible, but I can't oversee it. So I think that's maybe an action to better describe what we mean mean with it and what the data space should be. Otherwise, I would say easy access, as it is also here on top, is the key that we need to focus on simplicity to access data and to distribute data over Europe. Yeah, with this, actually, I would like to thank especially all the speakers that were supportive in order to drive this discussion ahead, also the audience for their inputs in Slido and also in the questions, and please excuse that I selected some in order to ice break the discussion. That was, I think, just necessary. Yeah, and thanks for listening. Stay tuned, follow our project, follow the initiatives of the European Commission, but also please don't forget also to follow on the initiatives of the private sector in that domain. So I think that's important, and we all together should shape here the future. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a nice coffee break now.